Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Careers in Paediatrics online workshop. In this session, we have our RCPCH regional representative, Dr. Laura Kelly, joining us to give us an insight of paediatrics in the West Midlands region. Just as a reminder to you all, in submitting questions, on the right-hand side of your screens is an Ask a Question tab, which you can use at any point of this session. And so, without further ado, I will now hand over to Laura. Laura, thank you.
Thanks, Henna, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon to hear a little bit about me, myself, and the Midlands, as I like to think of it, and hopefully you'll get some sort of interesting insights into how I've ended up as a paediatric trainee, and in particular how I've ended up being in the West Midlands for my training. It's going to be a little bit in the style of the sort of national COVID press conferences, so I'll be doing a sort of a next slide, please. So on that note, Henna, if I can have the next slide. So just to go through a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about today, so I'm going to talk a bit about my career and how I've sort of ended up where I am now. I'm going into sort of changeover next week. I'll be an ST5 working in general paediatrics, so you can hear how I've ended up there. A little bit about my role at the RCPCH as the representative for the West Midlands on the National Trainee Committee. A little bit about why I work in the West Midlands and why I think it's just the best place to be. A little bit about paediatric gastroenterology, which is my kind of particular interest, and training in paediatrics has allowed me to kind of develop that as a special interest. And also a highlight of the week, just to further illustrate sort of the amazing things that happen in the West Midlands. And at the end of this webinar, there's the chance for a bit of Q&A. You can put your questions through the kind of question and answer sort of chat section, and I will happily answer as many of those as I can at the end, and we'll save the questions and can upload some sort of answers to those with this talk, which if you've got some friends that aren't able to watch it today, it's being recorded and will be going onto the college's YouTube channel, which for me is quite exciting because I don't think I've featured in a YouTube video before. And I think that the heart of my talk today is perhaps to sort of convince you how fabulous being a paediatric trainee in the West Midlands is. And I chose this picture on this slide just to illustrate like the awesome sort of young people that I get to work with. And I think this little girl just embodies the sorts of patients that I meet on a day-to-day basis when I'm at work, and the sort of great fun that you can have in paediatrics alongside the kind of academic side and the sort of knowledge and skills side. So Henna, can I have the next slide, please? So starting off with a bit about my journey, and when talking about my career, I thought, what picture should I use to illustrate this? Lots of suggestions seem to be either pictures of ladders or boardrooms, but I chose a picture of a fun fair because my sort of career in paediatrics was about kind of, I knew I wanted to be a doctor and lots of things in medicine really appealed to me, but it was paediatrics that really captured that ability to have all the scientific rigour of being a doctor whilst also having sort of permission to work in a kind of fun and friendly way that sometimes I didn't feel was as obvious in other parts of medicine to me. So my career in medicine started at school, and it didn't start with a lifelong dream to be a doctor. I was always going to be a civil engineer. My plans right up into sixth form were that I was going to be a civil engineer, until I kind of realised that actually I probably wouldn't enjoy being a civil engineer. I didn't really want to be outdoors much, and I wanted to kind of have some fun, and I'm not sure that when you're constructing a bridge or a motorway you really want someone to have fun with the design. So I wasn't sure what to do, and I remember going to one of my teachers and saying, well, I'm not really sure civil engineering's for me, and she was like, well, have you thought about becoming a doctor? And she was like, so I think you'd be really good. And I was like, oh yeah, this seems really good. And I went and did a little bit of kind of work experience and some volunteering, and kind of thought, yeah, this seems really good. So I applied to medical school, and I ended up going to the University of Birmingham, and that started my lifelong love affair with the West Midlands. And at medical school, I didn't initially want to be a paediatrician. I had my heart set on being an anaesthetist. Our paediatric block was in our final year there, and I sort of started it, and I was kind of dreading it. I was a bit like, oh, you know, this is going to be like mayhem, there's going to be children all over the place, or I don't think this is for me at all. By the end of my first week of my paediatric placement, I was a complete convert and just had the most fun, and also felt really kind of intellectually stimulated, really enjoyed all the people I was working with, but also it was just throughout, it was kind of enjoyable, and that was just, I felt like I'd found this kind of magic sort of mix of ingredients. And I think it was no surprise to me, that was the first time in medical school I actually had sort of a consultant say to me, I really think you should consider this as a career. And my lovely sort of tutor for my paediatric block sort of said to me, you know, I really think you should think about paediatrics, and that's kind of where it all started. And so I was really lucky that this placement was happening at the time I was applying for my foundation jobs, and I was able to select a foundation job that had some paediatric experience in it, and to kind of see what it was like as a job. And I was lucky enough to get one of those jobs that had a paediatric placement in. And so in my F1, I got to spend 4 months working in general paediatrics at Birmingham Children's Hospital. And I absolutely loved it. And I think if you can go and do a specialty in winter, because I did the winter rotation when it's at its busiest and at its sort of, you know, highest patient numbers, and still love it, that's a pretty good test that you like that specialty. And so from there, I flirted a little bit with child and adolescent mental health as a job in FY2, but it was the acute paediatrics that really had me hooked. So I applied to paediatric training. I'm probably the last of the generation that typically went straight into training from the foundation programme. Certainly a lot more people now sort of take time out after the foundation programme. And I did apply to a few of these sort of F3 years, but unfortunately I didn't get any of the jobs. My major learning point from that is don't go to an interview straight after a night shift, but I applied to paediatrics, and I put my sort of learning from my bad experiences in these terrible interviews into kind of play, and my paediatric interview went really well, and I got a place, and the place I wanted to do my paediatric training was in the West Midlands, and I was lucky enough to get a training place and be able to kind of stay in the West Midlands. And then started as an ST1. It's 8 years of training. That might seem like a long time, but actually once you're a trainee you realise it's nice to have plenty of time to develop your skills. And I've sort of had to sit my membership exams, and now I'm an ST5. Sort of exams are slightly in the distance now, which is a nice feeling, and I'm about to start the process of applying for subspecialty training. So my particular interest is paediatric gastroenterology, which you'll hear a little bit about later, and I'm hopeful that I will, fingers crossed, maybe get a job to train as a paediatric gastroenterologist. And that's the great thing about paediatrics, is there's something for everyone. There's so many sort of opportunities within it. So if we can have the next slide, please, Henna. So we've got a little furry animal interlude here, because I wanted to break up the sort of information into sort of nice chunks, and so I thought, having talked about my career with kids, I would put in a picture of some kids. But just to clarify, I don't work with baby goats, I work with baby humans. So Henna, if we can have the next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is my role at the RCPCH. Now, initially I was going to put a picture of people sat around a table, but actually this year meetings of our Trainees Committee and of my kind of committee locally in the West Midlands have all been happening by Zoom. So this is kind of what our meetings look like at the moment. And I have to say, being the Trainees Committee representative for the West Midlands has been one of the most enjoyable parts sort of my kind of paediatric training, because it's been able to kind of pull together lots of things into a role that I just find endlessly kind of enjoyable. I'm always sort of meeting new people, learning new things, and it really also sort of feeds my kind of inner nosiness of liking to know what's sort of happening behind the scenes. So there's a national element to this role whereby I sit on the National Trainees Committee, and that committee sort of discusses issues that are important to trainees and sort of brings them to the attention of the college and kind of works with the college to look at ways that perhaps things can be changed or improve, or if the college is planning sort of perhaps a change to how training works or how the assessment of trainees works, they'll sort of come and discuss it with us so that we can create kind of something that works well for everyone and sort of reflects the needs of trainees and not just perhaps of trainers. So it's really been wonderful, and I think one of the realizations I've had the longer I've been in this role is actually within paediatrics and particularly within the Royal College is how kind of receptive and responsive to trainees our college is. You know, there have been occasions where I've had the opportunity to deputise for our chair and go to other kind of committee meetings with external bodies, like things like Health Education England or the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, and I'm always sort of secretly a little bit sort of smug at the stories I hear about other kind of organisations that are perhaps less receptive to change, and when I consider how receptive to change and to the needs of trainees and the Royal College of Paediatrics is. So it always makes me immensely proud to be a paediatric trainee, and I'm always very proud of the college that I'm sort of a representative within. There's also a regional component to what I do as well, and so when I started in this role, which is 3 years ago now, I'm sort of coming towards the end of my time as a regional representative. Myself and a colleague, a lovely paediatric trainee called Chris Hine, decided that we needed a regional trainees committee for the West Midlands. So that was kind of set up and is now sort of a really active committee. We have our own trainee website, westmidlandspediatrics.com, so have a little look at that. We have sort of an active Twitter account, so you can follow us at WMPeds. And we kind of do lots of things within the region. So we sort of work with the region's School of Paediatrics within Health Education England, again looking at how we represent and feed back about issues relating to training and assessment. And we've also kind of worked with the school to create ways of kind of making sort of training processes easier and more streamlined. So it's really kind of enjoyable. You get to work with so many different people and kind of get to sort of look at the kind of workings behind the scenes of training and what it takes to kind of train someone to be a paediatrician, which I find really, really interesting. So can we have the next slide, Henna? So another furry animal interlude, and this time it is a committee of bunny rabbits, just to reflect that we've been talking about my committee role. If we go on to the next slide, Henna. So obviously part of today's talk is to have a focus on the West Midlands, and I will unashamedly say that I am a huge fan of living and working in the West Midlands. It's one of the kind of best decisions I ever made. At university, there were sort of two schools of thought. There were those people that were like, oh, you should go and do your training somewhere far away from your medical school, go and try something different. And then there were people like, oh, I'm going to stay with what I know. And I was one of those. And I'm really glad I did that. You know, everyone's going to be different and have different needs. But for me, it worked really well to stay somewhere I knew. I'd sort of done my student placement in paediatrics in the children's hospital. I'd spent some time there on sort of student selected components. So it was really nice to then, as an F1, work there and kind of build upon those relationships, and sort of look at kind of projects and things I could do and kind of really hit the ground running. And also, you know, I have friends and family in the West Midlands, so it was really nice, you know, when you're starting your sort of working life as a doctor, to kind of still have those support networks around me. And it's a fantastic place. You know, you've got the UK's second city in Birmingham, and you've got lots of other big cities like Wolverhampton and Coventry, which mean you get lots of kind of the things that you'd associate with, you know, urban areas, but at the same time you've got multiple kind of areas of natural beauty and national parks sort of within easy reach of these areas, so you kind of get a bit of everything. I also absolutely love living in the West Midlands because it's diverse in so many ways. It's diverse in the people that live here, it's diverse in the geography, in the kind of age ranges. You know, you've got a very young population in the West Midlands, and it's got some very young cities, which as a paediatrician means it's sort of you're definitely in demand, but also means that actually you see a huge range of things. And also there's so much to do here that when you're not at work, there's always plenty of things to do, and you're sort of never bored. I think from a medical point of view, I love being in the West Midlands because the sheer volume of pathology you see is just, I think, unparalleled. I think, you know, you could perhaps draw some comparisons with London, but equally you've got to remember in London you've got lots and lots of hospitals. And so actually each individual hospital might not see as much pathology as you might see in some of the really big hospitals that you get in Birmingham. And that just means that, you know, when I talk to people kind of on a national basis, I realise I've seen things already in my career that many of my colleagues will never probably see, or something that I might see every week in Birmingham or in Coventry actually is sort of something that someone else might see once or twice in their career. So from a training point of view, it's just absolutely fantastic. And also there are lots of hospitals in the West Midlands, which for a trainee is brilliant, because you within quite a kind of compact area, we've got a huge range of hospitals. We've got big tertiary centres. As a paediatrics trainee, we have a tertiary children's hospital in Birmingham Children's Hospital, which is a fantastic opportunity because not every region has a tertiary children's hospital. But also even our district general hospitals are often quite sort of supercharged, turbo-sized hospitals with huge amounts of specialisation and variety within them. We've got lots of big kind of tertiary neonatal units, but we also have lots of sort of smaller, more rural units that see different types of pathology too. And all of this means that as a paediatrician in training in the West Midlands, we have all the specialties here. I don't need to travel to another region to experience a particular specialty, which I might need to do in another part of the country. They're all here in this region, which is just fantastic. You know, whilst I was in my SHO years, I managed to experience paediatric surgery, paediatric gastroenterology and paediatric respiratory alongside more sort of general topics. So I've just kind of loved having that variety and the ability to kind of go to the kind of calmer parts and more rural areas, but also you've got all the kind of urban excitement, both professionally and sort of personally as well. Of course, choosing a region is, as the picture says, a matter of opinion, but I'm a huge fan and would say that you get a really good rounding in paediatric training in the West Midlands. And this picture is actually some graffiti, or I'd say art, near where I used to live. So this is what I used to see on my walk to Birmingham Children's Hospital from where I used to live. So this is a picture of Birmingham and the Birmingham that I sort of know and love. So if we could have the next slide, Henna. So I was talking about choosing a region and thinking about friends and family. And so again, furry animal interlude. I thought I'd put a picture of two what seem like very good friends, probably the best of friends here. So if we can have the next slide, Henna. So I alluded earlier to paediatric gastroenterology being a particular love of mine. It's the specialty that I'm hoping to train in. Everyone send me some good luck. I just wanted to sort of focus a little bit on paediatric gastroenterology and why I'm finding that sort of particularly interesting. Now, forgive the slightly odd choice of picture. I was like, how do I illustrate gastroenterology in a way that is suitable for the post lunch period? So I've found this piece of modern art called No Guts, No Glory. And that I think sort of sums up my attitude to paediatric gastroenterology, because it is a glorious speciality, because it kind of offers a little bit of everything. And I think if you're one of those people, I certainly was, that sort of likes lots of things and finds lots of things enjoyable, it's a really great specialty to end up in, because you've got lots of quite acutely ill patients that you have to deal with. You know, often there are lots of sort of chronic conditions that you deal with, and they may present acutely. So you will have to deal with kind of inpatients who may sometimes be really quite unwell when they come in. And then your role in sort of as part of the team of sort of paediatric gastroenterology is helping those young people kind of get better from that sort of acute insult, but then also managing their chronic conditions, because a lot of the conditions we see in paediatric gastroenterology, things like celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, are going to be lifelong diagnoses. We can't make them go away, so we've got to help these young people manage their condition and sort of be as well as they can be. And I find that immensely satisfying, getting to not only look after really unwell children, but then see what happens to them and kind of watch them grow up and help kind of manage the kind of medical side of how they cope with their condition and sort of grow into adults, and kind of the success of your work as a doctor and as part of the team is actually how well that young person is able to kind of transition into kind of their sort of adult life and manage the conditions that they have. I also particularly like paediatric gastroenterology because you never stop performing your sort of skills. You don't become a consultant and don't really do practical procedures anymore, because of course you do endoscopy, and I find that sort of really kind of enjoyable, sort of getting to sort of put practical procedures into kind of play in sort of how I manage patients. And also, as I've mentioned before, paediatric gastroenterology isn't just about paediatric gastroenterologists, it's about the team. And I absolutely love working in a team. It's one of the reasons I love paediatrics, because paediatrics is all about team working. But I think in paediatric gastroenterology, especially so, you'll be working with nurse specialists, with dietitians, you know, with all sorts of different skills. You'll be working with other specialties, and it's just really sort of satisfying to kind of work as a team to achieve good outcomes. And also, I think definitely if you're someone that finds the idea of just sort of working sort of alone, a little bit lonely, then a specialty that's heavily kind of team-based can be really kind of enjoyable to work in. And I think it's just, for me, you know, it's just a very rewarding specialty. You know, I think sort of food and meal times are kind of intrinsic parts of our daily life. If you said to someone that you can't eat, or eating will make you unwell, or you can't sort of participate in meal times in the way that you would expect to. That's a hugely sort of profound thing. And so actually, if you can make people well enough that they can, perhaps on their own terms, but still participate and still have as much involvement in that kind of part of our kind of culture and sort of part of our sort of daily life, I think that's really quite rewarding. So that's a little bit about why I love paediatric gastroenterology. But I think what I'd say is amazing about paediatric training is that you can have the opportunity to apply to get sort of subspecialise in an area, and pretty much every adult specialty you can think of is represented in a paediatric form, plus a few others that are particular and unique to paediatrics. But also you can sort of stay as a generalist, because it's really satisfying being able to, as a generalist, kind of look after the whole patient and not just a part of the patient. But even within that, you know, many of my colleagues who are becoming specialists in general paediatrics are undertaking sort of special interest modules in particular areas. So there's huge amounts you can do with paediatrics, which is, I think, another reason why I think, in my opinion, it is, you know, the king of all specialties, because there's just so much and there's something for everyone within it. If we could have the next slide, please. So I've just been talking about subspecialties, quite rare, quite niche things. So I thought at this point I needed to have a slightly more unusual furry animal interlude. So we've got a red panda. I hope you're noticing that all of my furry animal interludes have been linked to what I've been talking about. I hope that's the special sparkle that being a paediatrician can bring to your presentations. If we can have the next slide, please, Henna. So I was asked to mention sort of a particular highlight of the week for me, sort of working as a paediatric trainee in the West Midlands. And last Wednesday, so exactly a week ago, we held our West Midlands Pafters for this year, and these are the Paediatric Awards for Training Achievements, an excellent acronym if ever there was one. Now the Royal College sort of National Trainees Committee sort of had the sort of brainchild of a national kind of Pafter awards. So each year at our conference, 3 awards are made nationally for Best Junior Trainee, Best Senior Trainee and Best Educational Supervisor. And what sort of the structure that has evolved is that each region has their own kind of regional Pafters, and then the winners of those 3 prizes sort of get put forward to the national competition. But also regionally, we have the flexibility to kind of make it sort of fit with our region and fit with kind of what we want to sort of celebrate. So this year we actually didn't just have the 3 prizes up for grabs, we had other prizes, including sort of training hero prizes for perhaps people that work non-clinically and sort of support paediatric training, or those that work in kind of allied health professions. We had an award for best training unit, which was hotly contested, and there was sort of lots of very friendly buzz on Twitter about who was going to win. And it was just been really lovely after what's been sort of a difficult year in healthcare. We can't ignore that we've had a global pandemic, but it was really lovely that sort of in our deanery we had 125 nominations, which is a big improvement on sort of what we've managed before. We're sort of getting bigger every year and more people are getting involved. And sort of we had some wonderful winners, and it was just a really lovely evening last Wednesday where we all got together on Zoom because we couldn't be there in person. We had a little awards ceremony, so I had to pretend to be sort of an Oscars MC, which was very nerve-wracking, but I think maybe I have a alternative career there should I ever need it. Probably not. And I think it would take a lot to persuade me to ever change career, quite frankly, which is a good thing in the careers talk. But also we had like a quiz and we had lots of fun, and it was just a really great evening. So this was absolutely sort of my highlight of the week. And I think kind of illustrates the sort of atmosphere that paediatric training has. I think sometimes there can be a perception in other specialties, whereas that training's about sort of dog eat dog and sort of being the best and kind of you're not sort of a team of trainees, you're all fighting and competing with each other. Whereas actually in paediatrics, that's not the case. We're much more about kind of celebrating sort of our colleagues, about working together as a team. I see my fellow trainees as my colleagues of the future, and it's highly likely that they probably will be my colleagues of the future. So I really like that kind of friendly team atmosphere rather than sort of a dog-eat-dog competitive thing. And the thing that actually at the awards got more people kind of excited about was, you know, sort of like who'd been nominated and less of sort of the winners. And there's lots of kind of like celebrations and excitement of like people saying, oh, I got a nomination, and then like all their kind of colleagues being like, well, of course you did, we think you're amazing. And it was just really nice and heartwarming, and just kind of reminded me why I sort of love being a paediatric trainee. So hopefully I've given you all a little bit of a sort of taster of how I've ended up as paediatric trainee, and a little bit about my interests in paediatrics, my role at the Royal College, and sort of why the West Midlands has been a really great place for me to be a paediatric trainee. So if we could have the next slide, Henna. So it's our last furry animal interlude of the day, and of course we've just been talking about sort of an awards and celebration ceremony. So of course I had to have a hedgehog that's clearly sort of won a prize here, and it's got a little tiara. So perhaps not furry, but very cute nonetheless. So if we can have the next slide, please, Henna. So I haven't been following the Q&A whilst I've been talking, I have to admit. But if anyone's got any questions, then absolutely be curious and sort of fire away. And certainly, if anyone does ever want to get in touch with me, you can find my email on the Trainees Committee page on the Royal College website for the Trainees Committee. And also you can follow me on Twitter at Laura AM Kelly. But thank you all for listening.